What do you think is the probability of a 14-year-old girl with no political power becoming the absolute ruler of the world's largest empire? Most people would say it's close to impossible, and yet this is exactly what happened to Wu Zetian in 7th century China. She was a concubine, essentially royal property, who would break every rule, kill anyone in her way, and rewrite 1,000 years of Confucian tradition to become China's first and only female emperor. But behind this extraordinary rise was something completely different. Wu's path to power was paved with murder, political genius, and a ruthlessness that would make Machiavelli look merciful. She allegedly killed her own infant daughter to frame a rival. She had 2 of her sons exiled. She ordered the torture and execution of thousands. And when it was all over, the Confucian historians tried so hard to erase her from history that we almost lost one of the most fascinating figures who ever lived. This story has strange but very real ties to gender politics, religious manipulation, and state terrorism. It has the intensity of Game of Thrones, but it all actually happened. The Tang Dynasty under Wu Zetian's rule reached heights of prosperity and military power that wouldn't be matched for centuries. But the methods she used were so brutal that China's elite establishment would spend the next 1,000 years making sure another woman could never do what she did. This is the wild story of Wu Zetian. To understand how insane Wu Zetian's rise really was, you need to understand the world she was born into. This was Tang Dynasty China, around 624 CE, and I'm not exaggerating when I say Tang China was the most advanced civilization on Earth. While Europe was struggling through the Dark Ages, the Tang capital of Chang'an was a cosmopolitan metropolis of over 1 million people, the largest city in the world. They had ice cream, printing, gunpowder, and a postal system that spanned thousands of miles. But this golden age came with an iron rule: women had no power. Confucian doctrine, which had governed Chinese society for nearly 1,000 years, was crystal clear on this. Women existed to serve men. A woman should obey her father, then her husband, then her son. The idea of a woman ruling, it wasn't just taboo, it was considered a violation of the natural order of the universe, literally. Confucian scholars believed that a woman in power would cause floods, droughts, and cosmic chaos. As one Confucian text put it, a hen does not herald the dawn. When a hen heralds the dawn, it indicates the demise of the family. So when Wu Zetian was born in 624, her fate seemed sealed. Be a good daughter, marry whoever your father chose, produce sons, die quietly. But Wu Zetian had other plans.
Wu Zetian was born Wu Zhao, the daughter of a wealthy timber merchant. Now, her family was rich, but they weren't nobility. Her father had made his fortune in business, which in Confucian hierarchy put him below aristocrats who inherited their status. According to historical records, Wu was unusually intelligent and strong-willed from childhood. Her father, unusually progressive for the time, taught her to read and write, skills most women never learned. She studied literature, music, and history, but most importantly, she learned something that would serve her for the rest of her life: how to read people. In 638, when Wu was just 14 years old, her life changed forever. Emperor Taizong, one of the greatest emperors in Chinese history, heard about this beautiful and educated merchant's daughter. He summoned her to the palace to become a concubine, a Karen, the lowest rank of imperial consort. Let me paint you a picture of what this meant. The imperial harem wasn't like a modern relationship. Emperor Taizong had hundreds of women. They were ranked in a strict hierarchy, like a corporate ladder, except instead of promotions, you're competing for the emperor's attention, and the competition was cutthroat. Wu entered a world of 1 empress, 4 imperial consorts, 9 consorts of various ranks, 38 lower-ranking concubines, and countless servants and attendants. Wu was at the absolute bottom of this pyramid. She served the emperor for 12 years, never rising in rank, rarely called to his bedchamber. For most women, this would be their entire life, anonymous, powerless, forgotten. But Wu Zetian was watching, learning, planning.
Now here's where things get interesting and a bit scandalous. While serving Emperor Taizong, Wu met his son, Prince Li Ji. The prince was sensitive, artistic, and nothing like his warrior father. Historical records suggest they fell in love, or at the very least had a relationship. This was absolutely forbidden. A concubine sleeping with the emperor's son? That was treason. The punishment was death. But they took the risk anyway. In 649, Emperor Taizong died.
And here's where Wu's story should have ended. When an emperor died, all of his lower-ranking concubines who hadn't borne sons had their heads shaved and were sent to Buddhist temples to live as nuns for the rest of their lives. It was over. Wu Zetian was 25 years old, and by all accounts, her life of political ambition should have ended in that Buddhist temple. But remember Prince Li Ji? He became Emperor Gaozong, and he couldn't forget Wu Zetian. For 2 years, Wu lived as a Buddhist nun. She studied scripture, learned meditation, and by all appearances, accepted her fate. But in 651, something remarkable happened. Emperor Gaozong visited the temple to pay respects to his late father, and he saw Wu again. Historical records describe this meeting in almost romantic terms. Their eyes met, old feelings resurged, but I'd argue something more calculating was happening. Wu Zetian was brilliant enough to know exactly how to position herself. Within months, she was recalled to the palace, not as a nun, not even as a low-ranking concubine. Emperor Gaozong made her a 5th-rank concubine, higher than she'd ever been under his father. And this is where Wu Zetian's real story begins. Because what happened next would shock the empire to its core. When Wu returned to the palace in 651, she entered a viper's nest. Emperor Gaozong already had an empress, Empress Wang. Empress Wang had a problem. She'd been empress for years, but hadn't given birth to any sons. The emperor's favorite consort, Consort Zhao, had given him several children and was gaining influence. These two women, Empress Wang and Consort Zhao, were locked in a bitter rivalry for power and the emperor's affection, and Wu Zetian saw an opportunity. Here's what she did, and it's brilliant in a Machiavellian sort of way. Wu allied herself with Empress Wang. Why would the empress ally with a new concubine? Because Wu was smart enough to position herself as a lesser threat. She told Empress Wang, "I'll help you defeat Consort Zhao. Together, we'll get rid of your real rival." Empress Wang bought it. Wu started getting close to the emperor, charming him with her intelligence and wit. Unlike other concubines who relied only on beauty, Wu could discuss politics, literature, and philosophy. Emperor Gaozong, who was scholarly and somewhat weak-willed, fell completely under her spell. By 652, Wu gave birth to a son, then another. She was rising through the ranks fast, too fast for comfort. And that's when the most controversial event in Wu Zetian's life occurred. In 654, Wu Zetian gave birth to a daughter. Historical records state that Empress Wang came to visit the newborn princess, admired her, and left. Shortly after, the baby was found dead. Wu immediately accused Empress Wang of murdering her infant daughter. She wept and wailed, claiming the empress had strangled the baby out of jealousy. Most historians believe Wu Zetian murdered her own baby daughter to frame Empress Wang. Think about that for a moment. The accusation is that Wu strangled her own newborn child, then blamed her political rival, knowing it would destroy the empress while generating sympathy for herself. Did it actually happen? We don't know for certain. The only sources we have are from Confucian historians who wrote decades or even centuries later, and they had every reason to demonize the woman who broke all their rules. But what we do know is this: Emperor Gaozong believed Wu, or at least he sided with her. He stripped Empress Wang of her title, he demoted Consort Zhao, and in 655, he did something that shocked the imperial court to its core. He made Wu Zetian his new empress. A former concubine of his dead father, a woman with no aristocratic lineage, a woman who, according to some officials, had committed the ultimate taboo. The Confucian officials were horrified. They submitted memorial after memorial begging the emperor to reconsider, but Gaozong ignored them all. Wu Zetian was now Empress of China, but that wasn't nearly enough for her. Once Wu became empress, she moved quickly to eliminate threats. Remember Empress Wang and Consort Zhao, the two women who'd stood in her way? Wu had them arrested, beaten, and thrown into prison. But even that wasn't enough. According to historical records, and again, take this with a grain of salt because the sources are biased, Wu ordered both women to have their hands and feet cut off. Then they were thrown into wine vats to drown in alcohol, slowly. Before dying, the former Empress Wang allegedly cursed Wu. "May you be reborn as a mouse, and I a cat, so I can chase you through every reincarnation." Reportedly, Wu was so disturbed by this curse that she banned cats from the palace and never spoke the names of Wang or Zhao again. But it didn't stop there.
Over the next several years, Wu systematically eliminated anyone who might threaten her position. Her uncle, who had helped raise her, was brutally executed. Several of the emperor's grown sons from other consorts were forced to commit suicide or exiled. Dozens of court officials who opposed her were either dismissed, exiled, or killed. She didn't do this directly, of course. Wu was far too clever for that. She established a network of informants and secret police. They had a name, the Jin Yi Wei, literally brocade-clad guards. These agents would infiltrate households, temples, and government offices. They listened for any criticism of Empress Wu. If they found it, the accused would be arrested, tortured, and forced to confess. Many were executed. Their families were exiled or killed. One official, Han Yuan, made the mistake of submitting a memorial criticizing Wu. He was beaten to death with wooden staves. Terror became Wu's governing tool. Officials lived in fear. But here's the crazy thing, the empire functioned better than ever.
By the 660s, Emperor Gaozong's health was failing. He suffered from dizzy spells and vision problems, possibly a stroke. He became increasingly unable to handle state affairs. So, Wu stepped in. At first, she sat behind a silk screen during court sessions, listening and occasionally whispering advice to the emperor. But gradually, she began issuing orders herself. Edicts went out under both their names, Emperor and Empress Decree. Confucian officials were scandalized, but there was nothing they could do. The emperor relied on her completely. When particularly stubborn officials protested, Wu had a solution. She'd order their execution, then tell the emperor they'd resigned or been reassigned. Gaozong, sick and passive, believed her. By 674, Wu and Gaozong adopted new titles: Tian Huang, Heavenly Emperor, and Tian Hao, Heavenly Empress. They ruled as co-emperors, though everyone knew who really held power. Then, in 683, Emperor Gaozong died, and Wu Tian's true ambitions were finally revealed.
When Emperor Gaozong died in 683, their son Li Shen ascended the throne as Emperor Zhengzong. He was 27 years old. His reign lasted 6 weeks. According to records, the new emperor immediately tried to promote his wife's father to a high position. Wu confronted him, saying this would create nepotism and corruption. The emperor, frustrated, reportedly said, "What's wrong with me giving the empire to my father-in-law if I want to?" Big mistake. Wu had him deposed within days and placed under house arrest. She installed another son, Li Dun, as Emperor Ruizong. But everyone knew Ruizong was a puppet. He sat on the throne, but Wu Zetian made every decision from behind the screen. This arrangement continued for 7 years. Wu ruled as Empress Dowager, the power behind the throne. But it wasn't enough. She wanted something no woman in Chinese history had ever claimed, the title of emperor itself.
In 690, Wu Zetian did the unthinkable. She forced her son to abdicate, and on October 16, 690, at age 66, she declared herself emperor of a new dynasty, the Zhou dynasty. Not empress, not Empress Dowager, emperor, Huangdi, the same title held by every male ruler since the first emperor united China in 221 BCE. She even chose a new name for herself, Zetian, meaning rule of heaven. Her full title became Shengshen Huangdi, Holy and Divine Emperor. To understand how radical this was, imagine if tomorrow someone announced they'd abolished gravity. That's how fundamental the rule of no female emperors was to Chinese society. Confucian scholars were apoplectic. They submitted memorial after memorial citing ancient texts proving that women ruling would cause cosmic disaster. They predicted earthquakes, floods, rebellions, foreign invasions. Wu's response? She commissioned new texts. She had Buddhist scholars create the Great Cloud Sutra, which conveniently prophesied that the Bodhisattva Maitreya would be reincarnated as a female emperor who would rule a golden age. See, it was destiny. She promoted Buddhism over Confucianism because Buddhism didn't explicitly forbid female rulers. She ordered the construction of massive Buddhist temples and statues. The famous Longmen Grottos near Luoyang feature a 57-foot Buddha that's said to bear Wu's facial features. But perhaps most cleverly, Wu invented a whole new Chinese character for herself, a character meaning light of sun and moon that hadn't existed before. She literally rewrote the written language to accommodate her rule.
If you thought Wu would ease up once she became emperor, you'd be dead wrong. She intensified the secret police system.
The most notorious enforcers were two officials, Lai Junchen and Zhou Xing. These men perfected the art of extracting confessions through torture. They invented devices like the punishment cage, a box lined with spikes that slowly closed; the rack, which stretched victims until joints dislocated; red-hot iron brands; acid baths. Lai Junchen wrote a manual on interrogation techniques called Lu Zhi, Manual of Frame-Ups. In it, he detailed methods to make innocent people confess to crimes they didn't commit. Thousands died. Some historians estimate that Wu's reign of terror claimed 10,000 to 20,000 lives, members of the royal family, officials, generals, and anyone accused of disloyalty. A famous story tells how Wu once asked Lai Junchen, "If someone refuses to confess under torture, what do you do?" Lai described his methods in detail, including a particular oven technique. Wu smiled and said, "Excellent, please demonstrate." She had Lai Junchen placed in his own torture device. He was cooked alive. Even her enforcers weren't safe from her. Despite the terror, despite the murders, despite breaking every rule of Confucian society, Wu Zetian's reign was remarkably successful. During her rule from 690 to 705, the Tang territory expanded significantly through military campaigns. Agricultural production increased. The imperial examination system was reformed to promote officials based on merit rather than aristocratic birth. Trade along the Silk Road flourished. Arts and literature thrived. This was the high point of Tang poetry. The government budget showed consistent surpluses. No major famines or rebellions occurred, except those she crushed. She promoted people based on talent, not birth. She appointed officials from lower classes if they proved capable. Several of the greatest military generals of the Tang Dynasty served under her. One of her key innovations was the recommendation box, a bronze box where anyone, regardless of rank, could submit suggestions or accusations directly to the emperor. Wu read them personally. Ironic, considering many of these recommendations probably led to executions, but it also meant Wu had information from every level of society. Now we need to talk about Wu's love life, because it's wild. After Emperor Gaozong died, Wu was a widow. She was in her 60s and 70s, ruling the empire, and she took young male lovers. The most famous were the Zong brothers, Zong Yiji and Zong Chongzong. They were both in their 20s, beautiful, and apparently very attentive to the elderly empress. Confucian historians describe this relationship in scandalous detail, the brothers performing in theatrical performances for her, massaging her, preparing cosmetics. The historical records go out of their way to portray Wu as a lustful old woman controlled by handsome young men. But here's an interesting question. If Wu was emperor, why shouldn't she have male consorts? Every male emperor had hundreds of female concubines. Why the double standard? The Confucian historians knew why this bothered them. It inverted the proper order. Men should possess women, not the other way around. A woman with agency over her own desires and power? Unthinkable. Whether Wu was manipulated by these men or simply enjoying her power and status, we'll never know. What we do know is that this relationship would eventually contribute to her downfall. In 684, just 1 year into her rule as regent, a major rebellion broke out. Li Jingye, a descendant of the old aristocracy, raised an army of 100,000 men. He issued a famous proclamation denouncing Wu. She murdered the empress and poisoned her mother. She killed her sister and slaughtered her brothers. She is a viper, a demon in human form. Heaven and earth cannot tolerate her. The rebellion spread across several provinces. For a moment, it looked like Wu's rule might end before it truly began. Her response? Absolutely brutal efficiency. She dispatched an army of 300,000 troops led by her most capable general. Within 3 months, the rebellion was crushed. Li Jingye was captured and executed, along with his entire extended family, 36 people in total. But after crushing the rebellion, Wu didn't just execute the rebels. She investigated which officials had supported them, even secretly. Then she purged them too. The message was clear. Opposition would be detected and destroyed, no matter how well hidden. By the early 700s, Wu Zetian was in her late 70s. Age was finally catching up to her. She became increasingly isolated, spending more time with the Zhang brothers and less time governing directly. Court officials, who had feared her for decades, saw an opportunity.
A faction formed, led by several old generals and officials, but they faced a problem. Wu still had immense power and cunning. A direct coup would likely fail. So they waited and planned. In 705, Wu fell seriously ill. She was 80 years old and bedridden. On February 20, 705, 5 officials forced their way into Wu's bedchamber in the middle of the night. They were led by Zhang Jianji, a 73-year-old official, and several military commanders. They found Wu Zetian in bed, the Zhang brothers attending to her. The officials immediately killed both Zhang brothers, stabbing them to death in front of the empress. Then they forced Wu to abdicate. The coup was bloodless except for the Zhang brothers. The officials knew that killing Wu herself might spark a civil war. She still had loyal supporters. Instead, they made her sign an abdication decree. 3 days later, her son Li Xian was restored to the throne as Emperor Zhongzong, the same son she'd deposed 22 years earlier. Wu Zetian was given the title Zetian Dasheng Emperor and placed under comfortable house arrest in the palace. 10 months later, on December 16, 705, Wu Zetian died. She was 81 years old. After Wu's death, the Confucian establishment tried desperately to erase her from history, or at least condemn her so thoroughly that no woman would ever try this again. Emperor Zhongzong, her son, had to decide what to inscribe on her memorial tablet. Wu had left instructions. She wanted a blank tombstone with no epitaph. Let history judge her, she'd said. So they erected a blank stone stele at her tomb. It stands there today, 7 meters tall, completely blank except for some later inscriptions added by other emperors. But the Confucian historians weren't content with silence. They wrote scathing histories. She murdered her baby, she was controlled by lust, she was a usurper who violated natural law, her reign was chaos and terror. Here's the problem. The facts didn't support this narrative. Yes, Wu killed people, lots of people. Yes, she was ruthless. But chaos? The economy boomed. Foreign invasions? The borders expanded. Natural disasters? That didn't happen either. The Confucian historians had predicted that a female emperor would cause cosmic disorder. The skies would fall, the empire would collapse. Instead, the Tang Dynasty reached its cultural and economic peak under her rule. So who was Wu Zetian really? Monster or visionary? Murderer or capable ruler? The honest answer is both. Modern historians have reassessed Wu Zetian, separating fact from Confucian propaganda. Here's what we can say with confidence. The murders are almost certainly true. Wu eliminated rivals ruthlessly. The body count was high. Whether she killed her own baby is debated, but she definitely killed lots of other people. The terror state, absolutely true. The secret police, torture, false accusations, all documented from multiple sources. The male favorites, true, though probably exaggerated by scandalous historians. The capable governance, also true. Economic data, population records, military achievements, these don't lie. The empire flourished. Wu Zetian proved that a woman could rule as effectively as any man, but the cost was becoming just as ruthless, just as authoritarian, just as willing to kill for power. She didn't overthrow patriarchy, she became the patriarch. Wu Zetian's story resonates today because it asks uncomfortable questions. If a woman must be twice as ruthless to achieve power, is that progress? Should we judge historical figures by their actions or by the systems that constrained them? Can you break unjust rules without becoming unjust yourself? In China today, Wu Zetian is a complex figure. To some, she's a feminist icon, proof that women can rule. To others, she's a cautionary tale of how power corrupts regardless of gender. There have been dozens of TV shows and movies about her. Some portray her as a villain, others as a tragic hero. In 2014, Empress of China, a TV series starring Fan Bingbing, was hugely popular, but had to be edited because Wu's low-cut dresses were deemed too scandalous. Even 1,300 years later, she makes people uncomfortable. Wu Zetian's story shows us how power actually works. Wu understood something fundamental. In a system designed to exclude you, playing by the rules guarantees failure. She didn't wait for permission or try to work within Confucian norms. She identified the system's weaknesses, the fact that an incapacitated emperor created a power vacuum, that merit-based promotion created loyal officials, that terror could silence opposition, and she exploited them ruthlessly. It's not pretty, but it's how power has always been seized by those born outside the ruling class. Wu's story also reveals the incredible force of institutional misogyny. Despite proving herself as capable as any emperor in Chinese history, despite ruling successfully for decades, the Confucian establishment spent centuries portraying her as a monster primarily because she violated gender norms. Modern Chinese scholars are slowly reassessing her legacy, recognizing her achievements while acknowledging her brutality. But for most of history, being an effective female ruler wasn't enough. The system would rather remember her as an evil aberration than admit a woman could legitimately hold power. And there's a final lesson about historical memory. Everything we know about Wu Zetian comes from sources written by her enemies. The official histories were compiled by Confucian scholars decades after her death, men who had every reason to exaggerate her crimes and minimize her achievements. We'll never know the full truth about the infanticide, the alleged murders of her sons, or how much of her cruelty was necessary and how much was excessive. What we do know is that powerful women throughout history have faced the same problem. Their stories are told by systems that never wanted them to have power in the first place. Today, over 1,300 years after Wu Zetian's death, China has never had another female emperor. The lesson was learned too well. Wu proved it was possible, and the system responded by making absolutely certain it could never happen again. But her legacy remains, hidden in the examination system she expanded, visible in the Buddhist temple she built, present in the historical record despite every attempt to erase it.
The whole thing reminds me of how institutions throughout history have responded to challenges to their power structures. They rewrite history, they create myths, they turn successful outsiders into monsters to discourage others from following their path. Wu Zetian's story is a reminder that history isn't just what happened, it's also a story about who gets to tell what happened and why they tell it the way they do. So what do you think about Wu Zetian? Was she a brilliant leader who did what she had to in a system stacked against her? Or was she a power-hungry tyrant who proved the Confucians right? The truth, as always, is probably more complicated than either simple narrative. Feel free to discuss below. For now, I'm going to leave you with this thought. Somewhere in that palace in 7th century China, a 14-year-old girl looked around at a system designed to keep her powerless and decided she was going to rule it instead. And against all odds, she did. That's it from me. I'll see you again soon for the next episode. Cheers!